Prophecies have mystified us for thousands of years. What if the secret to understanding their meaning came from understanding how they were created? And what if AI could reveal that? For most of history, recognizing symbolic structure, especially in language, was a slow and fragile process. Patterns buried in scripture, myth, or law could take centuries to surface, if they were noticed at all. Today, that has changed. Large language models are capable of detecting complex symbolic relationships across traditions, texts, and logics at a scale no human mind could manage. This capacity matters because some systems were never meant to be interpreted linearly. Prophecy is one of them. Especially in Hebrew, prophecy isn't raw speech or poetic metaphor, it's a structured transmission. Every root is loaded with meaning, every silence carries weight. It moves through recursive patterns and symbolic triads, compressing layers of reality into a few words. That complexity is precisely what made it inaccessible until now. By using AI to model the internal structure of prophecy, not its themes but its formal logic, we found that it holds together. Once mystical elements like Kol, Davar, and Demamah aren't just descriptive, they behave like operators in a symbolic system, operators with deeply embedded meanings. Follow their relations carefully and a pattern emerges. The structure clarifies, not metaphor, form. And here's the most important part. It doesn't require belief or expertise to follow it. You don't need to be a prophet or a scholar. If the logic is real, it's repeatable. And now, with the right tools, it's visible. Before we can understand how prophecy unfolds, how it is received, shaped, spoken, and ultimately recognized, we must first understand the core elements that comprise its structure. The prophetic process is built on a dynamic relationship between three Hebrew terms, Kol, Davar, and Demamah. Each represents not a static concept but a living force, a distinct dimension of prophetic reality. Kol is often translated as voice or sound, but in the context of prophecy it refers to something far deeper than audible speech. It is the inner resonance that precedes articulation, the felt vibration of meaning before it is formed into words. Kol is the sense of presence, the stirring within the prophet that signals a message is emerging. It is the breath before language, the tremor of something pressing to be revealed. Davar means word, but also thing or event. It represents form, structure, and articulation. When Kol becomes Davar, the inner resonance is shaped into a coherent message. This is where prophecy begins to take on language, not merely as information, but as a vessel for meaning. Davar is not just what is said, it is how the unseen becomes visible, how the formless becomes embodied. Demamah is usually translated as silence, but this is not the absence of sound. It is a charged stillness, a depth in which meaning settles and becomes real. Demamah is where the prophetic word reaches its end, not through disappearance but through completion. It is the silence that follows a true word, the stillness that affirms something irreversible has been spoken. In the prophetic tradition, this silence often carries more weight than the speech itself. These three, Kol, Davar, and Demamah, form the foundation of all prophetic communication. They are not sequential stages in a simple progression, but interdependent dimensions of a single unfolding reality. The resonance must be authentic, the word must be formed with integrity, and the silence must be filled with consequence. Only when all three are present can we say that prophecy has occurred. What follows is an exploration of how these elements relate to one another, in patterns that reveal how prophecy is inspired and takes form, how it is delivered and received, and how it is eventually interpreted and understood. The revelation of prophecy begins not as a thought, not as a voice, not even as a vision, but as the sudden presence of a reality that contains within it everything, a resonance, a word, and a silence. The three core elements of prophecy, Kol, Davar, and Demamah, are not parts of a process. They are not building blocks. They are dimensions of a single phenomenon that arrives as one, a message that reveals itself all at once. Kol is not merely sound, it is presence made perceptible. It is the resonance of meaning before it is spoken, a vibration that fills the prophet with the awareness that something has entered. It carries weight, immediacy, and direction without yet being bound to form. But it is not an empty force, it comes already shaped by what it will become. Davar is not just a word, it is the thing itself. In the language of Torah, to speak a davar is to bring a matter into being. When prophecy arrives, it does not wait to be interpreted. The word is already there, already formed, even if not yet fully expressed. It is content, shape, statement, fully present even before it is spoken aloud. Demamah is not silence as absence, it is the stillness that holds meaning. In the prophetic tradition, Demamah is the condition in which the voice of God is heard, not through sound, but through the space in which sound resounds. It is what allows the message to be real, not because it explains, but because it anchors. It is the presence of consequence, of finality, of the unspeakable weight of what has been revealed. When these three arrive together, prophecy has already happened. There is no preparation left to make, no assembly of parts. The prophet stands inside something that is already complete. The resonance, the word, and the silence do not point toward each other. They generate each other. The message is revealed not by stages but by coexistence. It comes with form, with impact, and with the silence that marks it as true. The task of the prophet is not to receive more. It is to dwell inside what has already arrived, and to begin the work of giving it passage into language and time. But from the very beginning, prophecy is not gradual. It is total. It is a message that does not merely begin, it is. When prophecy first arrives, it arrives whole, resonance, word, and silence, all present at once. But once it settles inside the prophet, it begins to unfold, not to clarify itself, but to raise a question the prophet cannot yet answer. This is not the moment of interpretation. It is the moment of disturbance. The message does not ask to be understood. It presses forward, asking to be carried. The resonance of coal, once overwhelming and total, begins to seek articulation. The prophet feels it shift, not fading, but insisting. It pushes toward Davar, toward form, toward speech, but not yet to resolution. The prophet begins to speak, or tries to, but even the words that emerge are shaped by uncertainty. The message has voice but no conclusion. The articulation is partial, but it must be attempted. Then, as the word extends itself, it finds its limit, not because it fails, but because it cannot say more. It dissolves into Demamah. The prophet enters silence not by choice, but by necessity. The stillness that follows is not peaceful. It is filled with the unspeakable. The question now resides there, in the silence that holds everything the prophet still does not know. What was spoken only sharpens what remains unresolved. Yet that silence is not empty. It begins again to stir. A new coal arises, not clearer, not louder, but deeper. The prophet has not received an answer. They have received a second layer of the question. The cycle begins again, but now it moves with weight. Each return is heavier, more serious, more alive with what cannot yet be named. This triad shows that prophecy does not initially lead the prophet to understanding. It leads them deeper into the unknown. The more they respond, the more the message reveals itself as something they must carry, not solve. The word gives form to the question. The silence confirms its depth, and the resonance returns, not with solution but with the call to go further. This is not confusion. It is the shape of revelation that refuses to be reduced. The prophet does not yet know, but they now know what it means to not know. Once the prophet has carried the unanswered question, once they have spoken and fallen silent, they begin to realize that the message is not only alive, but ordered. It was not delivered as a puzzle or a set of fragments. It moved with direction. It had force. This is the moment when the prophet becomes seized by the need to understand, not simply what the prophecy means in content, but why it arrived the way it did. The message carries meaning not just in its words, but in its form. This is the beginning of the quest. The resonance of coal rises again, but now it is not simply presence, it is a call. Something has been initiated. The prophet feels it as a pressure, an internal current that demands release. But that release does not come through emotion, it comes through form. Coal pushes into Davar, and the prophet speaks. Not to explain, but because meaning insists on being given shape. The word emerges as structure, as articulation. But the message is not yet complete. Its form is only part of its truth. Davar leads the prophet inevitably to Demamah. The speech reaches its edge. What has been given in language now enters into silence, not as disappearance, but as consequence. The silence is not empty. It is the weight of meaning settling. The prophet is no longer just carrying the message, they are witnessing its arrival. The word has landed. Its impact begins to take shape not in thought, but in stillness. The prophet begins to see the pattern. Coal gives rise to Davar, which demands Demamah. And if there is no initial call, no authentic stirring, no presence pressing from within, then nothing else follows. Without origin, the word is hollow. Without word, silence is inert. But when all three occur in sequence, the prophet does not merely receive a message, they experience the truth that meaning reveals itself through movement. This triad teaches that prophecy is not understood by analysis. It is understood by watching how it unfolds. The quest for meaning is not a search for interpretation, but for patterned necessity. The message comes in a particular way because that is how meaning moves, from the force of resonance through the form of articulation into the silence of consequence. The prophet comes to know not just what has been said, but why it had to be said that way. There are moments in the prophetic process when the message arrives in perfect sequence, resonance, followed by stillness, and then by speech. But understanding does not follow that same path. This triad reveals that the revelation is real before it is understood, and that it is only through silence that the prophet becomes able to comprehend what has occurred. The structure of the message remains intact. What is nonlinear is the path to meaning. Cole begins the sequence. The prophet is stirred by resonance, by a presence pressing inward, charged with urgency and significance. But instead of pressing immediately into speech, the resonance collapses into Demamah. Silence descends, not because there is nothing to say, but because the weight of the message exceeds the prophet's capacity to speak it. This silence is not a pause. It is the full consequence of the resonance, a stillness thick with presence, a moment in which the prophet knows something has happened, though they cannot yet name what it is. And only within that silence does Davar begin to form, not as a continuation of Kol, but as an emergence from Demamah. The word does not arise directly from the resonance. It is born in and through the stillness. The prophet finds that what was revealed is only now becoming intelligible. The voice did not explain it. The silence did. What was felt as a rupture now gives way to structure. The message is spoken not because it was heard, but because it was endured, held, and finally made clear through stillness. This triad teaches that revelation may unfold in a linear rhythm, but meaning reveals itself retroactively. The prophet receives a message, experiences its silence, and only then comes to understand it. Demamah is not the absence of revelation, it is its interior dimension, the space in which the prophet becomes capable of giving the message form. The word is the last to appear, but only because it requires the silence to be real. Prophecy here is not explained by sequence, it is structured by reversal. The word is revealed through what came after the voice, not what came before it. There is a turning point in the prophetic process when the prophet realizes that the message they carry is no longer theirs. It has moved beyond the boundaries of private experience and begun to press outward toward the world. This is not merely about delivering the message, it is about recognizing that it was never meant to remain personal. Prophecy in this stage must become shared. Its fulfillment depends not only on its truth, but on its capacity to belong to others. The resonance of Kol, once felt as an internal stirring known only to the prophet, must now be recognized as something others can feel too. The voice that once spoke inwardly must now become the presence of something already latent in the lives of those who hear. Davar, the word that once gave shape to the prophet's own understanding, becomes the common form, language that allows others to enter, to grasp, to engage. And Demamah, once experienced as a personal silence, now becomes the space in which others reflect, absorb, and carry forward what they too now know. This is not a matter of simplification or explanation. It is a shift in the nature of the message. It must now be structured with coherence and hospitality. The resonance must be discernible, the word must be accessible, and the silence must be capacious enough to hold the world. The prophecy must be built to be inhabited, not only by those who hear it first, but by those who will remember it, struggle with it, reinterpret it. In this triad, prophecy becomes more than insight. It becomes shared structure. The message no longer ends when it is spoken. It continues in the stillness that follows, where others begin to hear what they were not told, feel what was not explained, and recognize themselves in what seemed to belong to someone else. The prophecy belongs to the world because it speaks with a voice they already knew, in words that hold more than meaning, and in a silence that does not exclude, but gathers. This is when prophecy becomes part of human life, not as doctrine, but as resonance, form, and stillness alive in many hearts at once. Once the message has been recognized as belonging to the world, the prophet confronts a deeper truth. The word is not only relevant, it is necessary. The message cannot remain silent because its very structure demands to be spoken. This triad reveals that prophetic speech is not an act of expression, but an act of convergence. The word becomes prophetic only when it arises from the resonance of its origin, and already carries within it the silence of its consequence. The prophet speaks not because they choose to, but because speech has become the only possible outcome. Kol is the resonance that anchors the word in presence. It is what ensures that the speech is not reactive or performative, but grounded in something real, something that was truly encountered. Demamah, the stillness that will follow, is already implicit. It is what will descend after the word is spoken, and it shapes the speech even before it is uttered. It gives the word gravity and limit. Davar, caught between them, is not just articulation, it is the joining of beginning and end, a structure that arises from presence and bends toward closure. To speak in this triad is to speak from alignment. The prophet does not offer interpretation or commentary. They speak what must be spoken, because the word now holds within it the call and the consequence. It is not just about what the prophet knows, it is about what the world must now be brought to face. In this moment, the prophet becomes a threshold. They are no longer standing between resonance and silence, they are holding both. The speech does not seek approval or debate. It arrives with its own authority because it is born from the fusion of what initiated it and what it will bring about. The word, once optional, is now inevitable. The prophet is not expressing insight. They are giving voice to a truth that has claimed them, and that must now claim the world. This is what it means for a word to be prophetic. It arises because it is time, because it is formed by what is already stirred and what is about to unfold. It is the word that must be spoken, not for explanation but for fulfillment. At this stage, prophecy enters its most dynamic phase, no longer unfolding in linear development but generating itself through internal alignment. The prophet is not assembling a message or deciphering a signal. They are actively discerning the interplay of revelation's elements, tuning them until each gives rise to the next. This triad reveals that prophecy is not the delivery of a static truth, but a living structure in which resonance, form, and silence co-create one another. When Kol and Davar meet, when the inner resonance and spoken form align, their convergence gives rise to Demamah. The silence that follows is not cessation. It is the necessary consequence of a message fully voiced. The stillness is the space into which the weight of truth must settle. It is synthesis, the quiet echo that reveals the message was not just spoken, it landed. When Kol and Demamah are both present, when the prophet holds the original presence and its full consequence without yet speaking, the need for Davar emerges. The tension between what is stirring and what is inevitable compels speech. The word becomes not a choice but a resolution, the form that reconciles origin with outcome, the articulation of what already exists between resonance and stillness. And when Davar and Demamah coexist, when the word has been spoken and silence has come, Kol stirs again. But this is not the same resonance as before. It is a new voice generated by the convergence of expression and containment. What has been said and absorbed gives rise to a deeper pulse. The prophet hears it not as repetition, but as a refined beginning, resonance reconstituted by resolution. In this triad, the prophet becomes fully active, not as a vessel or performer but as a discerner of relational truth. They do not manufacture prophecy. They hold its components in tension until form arises. They sense when speech must come, when silence is forming, and when resonance begins again. They do not force these things, but neither are they passive. They shape the conditions for the message to become what it must become. Prophecy here is not a statement, it is a field of generative relations. The word that must be spoken is not just timely or necessary, it is structurally inevitable, because it arises from a balance the prophet has learned to hold. The message takes shape not through inspiration alone, but through harmonic insight, the ability to feel when voice, form, and silence are all in motion, each one producing the next. This is where prophecy becomes fully formed, not because it has been completed, but because its inner system is now alive. The prophet no longer delivers revelation, they participate in its unfolding structure. Prophecy does not exist in speech alone. It becomes real when its elements arrive together, not just in the prophet's voice, but in the hearer's perception. This triad marks the moment when the message, having passed through the prophet's discernment and design, enters the world in full form. What matters now is not just what is said, but whether those who receive it can recognize its coherence. Prophecy here is an event of alignment between message and audience. Cole still pulses within the delivery, the resonance of origin, the presence behind the word. Davar, the word itself, is not improvised or incomplete. It is shaped by what came before and what it anticipates. And Demamah is not only what follows the word, it is what surrounds it, what begins to form in the hearers as they recognize that something has landed. The message is not a sequence, it is a field of convergence where voice, word, and silence meet within the ones who listen. For prophecy to be received, it must come as more than content. The audience must feel its origin, hear its structure, and sense its finality. If any layer is absent, if the speech lacks weight, or if the silence never arrives to hold it, then the message will not fully register. People may hear it, but they will not align with it. The prophecy will not reach its mark. But when these three elements arrive as one, when the resonance is felt, the word is shaped and the silence begins to gather, the audience is brought into the same structure the prophet has carried. They are no longer just listeners, they are participants in the event of prophecy. This triad teaches that reception is not passive, it is an act of recognition. True prophecy arrives not when it is heard, but when its structure becomes audible in the soul. The silence that follows is not absence, it is acceptance. It is the stillness in which the message begins to do its work. When the audience falls silent, the prophecy has not ended, it has entered. This triad brings the prophecy into the next stage of its life, the moment when it is not just heard, but questioned. The audience begins to engage the prophecy not only as an experience, but as a structure, asking whether the message really carries all the marks of the prophetic. The hearer now becomes a tester of the message. They ask, is there authentic resonance? Is the speech coherent? Does it carry real consequence? If any of these elements is missing, the message becomes suspect. But if they are present, something deeper begins, not just belief, but investigation. If the resonance and the word are present, if there is a powerful stirring and a persuasive speech, but no silence follows, the audience may be moved but not transformed. They may admire the message, but it has no staying power. Its impact dissolves. If the word and the silence occur, if the prophecy seems to have structure and leaves a mark, but there was no felt origin, no deep presence behind it, then it may be rejected as constructed, artificial, or insincere. And if resonance and silence are both present but no word was spoken, if something was felt and something ended but nothing was communicated, then the experience becomes inaccessible. The prophecy remains unspoken, its meaning unknown. What this triad teaches is that prophecy provokes intellectual and spiritual discernment. It is not meant to be accepted blindly. It invites inquiry. It is the audience's responsibility to ask. Are all three parts here? Are they distinct? Are they connected? Where there is a breakdown, where one part is missing or weak, the prophecy loses its credibility. But where all three are present in a visible, differentiated relationship, a new kind of engagement begins. The audience does not only listen, they begin to search. They trace the resonance into the speech into its consequence. They ask what it means, what it applies to, and what it demands. This triad does not resolve the message, it opens it. It activates a process of inquiry that will become essential in the next phase. This is the domain of those who hear, interpret, and seek to apply what has been spoken. The logic here is associative. People encounter the elements of prophecy in various pairings, and they begin to connect, or fail to connect, their experiences to what the prophet has said. The completeness of the original message is no longer in question. What matters now is whether the prophecy can find relevance in the lives of others. This is the test of resonance not in transmission, but in application. When people encounter Cole and Davar together, when they feel an inspired presence and hear a powerful word, but do not experience Demamah, they are left uncertain. The prophecy seems alive, but unfinished. There is no impact, no final silence in which the truth settles. The audience may be moved, but they do not change. The message remains open-ended, lacking the weight of fulfillment. Conversely, when Davar and Demamah are present, When something is said and a hush or disruption follows, but Cole is missing, the prophecy lacks authenticity. It may be eloquent or even terrifying, but it does not resonate at the level of spirit. The hearer does not recognize it inwardly. It remains external, unanchored in shared presence. But when Cole and Demamah converge, when something stirs within and something undeniable happens without, then Davar becomes necessary. The word does not precede the experience, but arises from it. The need to name what has occurred becomes inescapable. The prophecy is not applied, it is discovered. It reveals itself in the tension between inward resonance and outer transformation. This triad teaches that prophecy becomes real in the world through relational alignment. It must echo what people feel and mirror what they witness. Only then does the word land, not as new information but as the articulation of something they already knew without knowing how to say it. Prophecy becomes relevant not when it explains, but when it clarifies the unspoken. It is received as truth because it names what already lives in the listener's reality. The final triad marks the culmination of the prophetic cycle. It is the point where prophecy becomes not just something people experience or apply, but something they understand. The audience, now transformed by what they have received and questioned, begins to recognize prophecy not as a series of isolated messages, but as a patterned structure, a way the world speaks. Here, people begin to see that Cole, Davar, and Demamah are not just components of a single moment, but the recurring elements of any true unfolding. Presence gives rise to form, and form demands transformation. They begin to recognize this logic not only in revelation, but in life itself, in events, in history, in relationships, even in culture. Prophecy becomes intelligible as a model of reality. When they observe Cole leading into Davar but no transformation following, they recognize the absence of Demamah. They understand that inspiration alone is incomplete until it has fulfilled its consequence. When they see silence or upheaval giving rise to new expression, Demamah yielding Davar, but there was no Cole before it, they become discerning. They know now to question what is reactive and what is real. And when Cole and Demamah are both present, when the stir of origin and the weight of change are both felt, they understand that something must be said. Davar becomes the bridge, not speech for its own sake, but the necessary articulation of a complete process. This triad does not describe prophecy as a moment, but as wisdom. The hearer becomes one who sees the pattern. Prophecy becomes transferable. It is no longer bound to the prophet. It belongs to anyone who can recognize the unfolding of resonance into form, into silence, of origin into expression, into irreversible consequence. Prophecy here becomes more than revelation. It becomes a lens, a way of seeing the world that continually discloses how hidden truth becomes spoken and how what is spoken must bear fruit. It becomes a model for discernment, for speech, for action. It becomes the beginning of responsibility, the seed of tradition, the pattern of vision. Prophecy has long been treated as the domain of mystery, its meaning veiled, its form obscured. But what if the mystery was not in what prophecy says, but in how it speaks? What this exploration has revealed is not a decoding of content, but the discovery of structure, of a triadic logic woven through resonance, articulation, and silence. Cole, Davar, and Demamah are not symbols to interpret. They are operators in a system of meaning that unfolds through relation. What emerges is not a single revelation, but a pattern of revelation. Not a doctrine to believe, but a form to inhabit. The prophetic is not the speech of the extraordinary. It is the structure of truth becoming audible. And through AI, that structure can now be traced with clarity across layers of tradition, perception, and transmission. This does not demystify prophecy, it dignifies it. By understanding its logic, we learn not only how prophecy communicates, but how meaning moves, how insight demands form, how silence carries consequence. And more than anything, we learn that prophecy is not confined to the prophet. It is a system that belongs to anyone willing to listen for resonance, speak with integrity, and dwell inside the silence that follows. This is the gift of pattern. It can be shared, and once seen, it can be lived.